Torrential Chicago. We are yet, you and I, at a closer distance from this distance. A philosophy of bodies, a camel needled inside the eye of a mirage. I came here to be alone inside myself with others. Like all the other hard suns in the mouths of dandelions, crack shooting out of sidewalk carpet. The burnt brick buildings breathing ivy vines like external veins. The quilted contrast of our years between this place and this place now. A box spring thrown off a roof. I came here to rediscover you. Our denim hands and vinyl lit bars, those tooth marks we left like secret pockets between the seats, our thighs. Now the Edison moon talks for hours with itself, both chalk and chalkboard. Another ode to what? There's no word, even fewer words, for what we have left. Summer sky the shape of a bruise, chemical rain, your hair laughing in the trees like lightning, a permanent anything.
All right. Welcome to another episode of Poets in Montana, and today's poet guest is Philip Schaefer. Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's a terrific poem. What the title again was?
Torrential Chicago.
Torrential Chicago. Yeah, I've only been there once, and but that took me there in ways.
It tracks a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I used to live there before I moved to Montana. I was there for about 3.5 years, and it's where I didn't meet my who would become wife, but it's where we found our romance, both in terms of who we were individually and who we would become together. And I was back visiting about a week and a half ago with a buddy of mine, and who's also a poet, and we kind of just painted the town red, and this was the poem that I wrote it while I was there, and I was thinking about the longevity of, being married now for 11 years and having lived in Montana now for 11 years post-Chicago, what that sort of place both meant to me then and means to me now, and the transition between experiences accumulating in a way where you can't recreate what you did and lived back then, but you can try.
Yeah.
But we're older now, and things change, and you change, and
yeah.
So that was just sort of my processing of that little vacation.
Yeah, cool. Well, she's very much in there. We got that. Yeah, and then all just the sort of the detail of just the vines and those buildings.
Yes.
And all that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd never been to a big city until I first went to Chicago.
Yeah, it's a big city, and it's pocketed with neighborhoods, but in those neighborhoods you'll find various forms of architecture, various forms of upkeep or downkeep,
right.
And the vines on the brick buildings. There's something about that image. It's not, integral only to Chicago, but when I'm there,
Right.
It stands out.
Right. I was just recently, and my son is over in Seattle, so I was just recently over there, and we walked across that campus there, UW campus.
Yep.
And that was somewhat similar to like Harvard and because back east,
Yep.
those places.
Yeah, has some of that,
All that greenery on
Yes.
the buildings and
the sort of scholarly age.
Gothic looking
Yeah.
buildings. Yeah, very cool. Well, so you started out, where do you hail from?
I hail from Columbia, Missouri, so I'm Midwestern by nature, and I lived there for 18 years. I went to a small liberal arts state college in Kirksville, Missouri, which is closer to Iowa on the northern side, and got my my undergrad degree in philosophy, and started taking a few creative writing classes in my junior year of college. Realizing that was much more interesting to me than the philosophy I was majoring in. I still enjoyed it, but I knew after I graduated I would probably write poems more than essays.
Yeah.
And
More fun.
Yeah, exactly. And I went to Nashville for a year and lived with my old high school friends, did the music scene thing, but it wasn't fully my speed. So my college friends who had moved to Chicago after undergrad said, "Hey, why don't you come up here?" And I said, "All right, sounds good." So I packed up my little Honda Civic and drove to Chicago, and I crashed on a screened-in porch for a month until I could find a job and find a place to rent.
Yeah.
And that's when I started really getting into the restaurant industry, and that's how I sort of made my ends meet, but was writing the whole time, spending most of my mornings in cafes and whatnot. Eventually to the point where I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna start applying for graduate schools. And I applied to, 10, 11, 12, something like that. Ended up getting into two of them, Colorado State in Fort Collins and University of Montana here.
Right.
And they said, hey, we're going to give you money instead of you have to pay us money. So that made the decision pretty easy.
Yeah.
And, it was a 2-year program. Didn't ever anticipate that it would turn into a
Right.
place I live forever, possibly.
Right.
But now it's seeming more like I'll be here for the long term.
And you pardon me, I know you, like you say, you worked in the restaurant industry forever. You working in a restaurant right now here in Missoula, right?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I own the Camino with my business partner and head chef. And we were bartending together for years and years down at Montgomery Distillery. And we had gone on a sales trip to Chicago for the distillery to sell their product. And we stepped into a little whiskey and tequila bar that did tacos with our suitcases in hand. We had gotten off the train. It was the first place we stopped.
Yeah.
And I said, you guys got to go here. It's my old neighborhood haunt. And we did. We did the whole trip. We come back. My friend and bartending cohort texted me late one night and said, we should try to open something like this in Missoula. And to which I brushed him off and said, funny joke. But then he said, I'm serious. Why don't we just start thinking about it? So we spent a year reading, researching, cooking in his kitchen, just having fun with the idea of it. Very much a pipe dream until we started realizing we didn't want to work for other people our whole lives. If there was a chance we could open something cool and unique for our town. It took us a lot longer than it would take most people, I think, because we had never done it. But now we've kind of figured it out. It's hard. It's wonderful. It's a roller coaster of everything. But so I'm like equal parts writer, participant in that world, and restaurant runner, and making sure that things are organized and in place and whatnot.
So you never had any real designs on like teaching or anything like that out of school?
Good question. I did, very much so. But because I got married shortly before moving here and going to school, I knew that the dream and the sort of nomadic romance of adjuncting and moving and seeing all these different colleges and universities wasn't going to be sustainable for a marriage if I wanted that to last.
Right.
And this was, basically I said, okay, there are two things I think I'm decent at in this world. One is writing and teaching, and the other is working in a restaurant. And practically and financially speaking, I knew that the writing and teaching thing wasn't going to happen in a sustainable way for me here, but I knew I didn't want to leave here. So that was sort of the rub. The beauty that I found since all of this is that I've been able to lead a handful of community-based workshops. I just finished one up a few weeks ago, actually. And you sort of get all the wonderful, fun things of teaching and talking about poetry and creative writing and editing, while none of the academic pressure from, an organized university.
Right.
I'm not handing out grades. I'm just writing comments.
Right.
And, I'm not in that for anything financial. It's not about that. It's about having a part of my life that is very important to me
Right.
resurface from time to time.
Right, right. Kind of like the difference between writing poems or essays. I mean,
Exactly.
it
Yeah,
is. It's just
totally.
like there's a freedom and a fun, and
Yeah.
it's in the moment. And
You get the pleasure of the experience more than the grind of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I can relate to your dilemma on what to do with your career, because I did basically the same thing.
Yeah.
In terms of trying to follow those things that you knew were not going to be sustainable with a relationship, because I got married when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so I decided to go with that, and life has been good so far.
Yeah, I agree. And if you flip the coin and I was going the other route, I would hope that I would be happy and things would be great as well. But my relationship with the state of Montana and with my wife was much stronger than my desire to explore the other corners of our country.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I love it here and I want to be here.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we should mention that your first book, Bad Summon, came out when?
2017. I believe I got my first copies in July. I was on a camping trip in the Bob Marshall Wilderness backpacking.
Wow.
And I knew, the box was going to arrive at some point, and then eventually I got home and there it was waiting for me, and I was like, wow, this is, a landmark moment for me, and to come home to it after a very big trip, it just felt like the juxtaposition of those two things was sort of perfect.
You're in the right place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Well, I know it's an award-winning book, and I enjoyed it when I first picked it up. So do you want to read anything from it or anything else? I don't.
Yeah.
I know you got a new manuscript too to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. I think I'll start from here, and then we can just kind of bounce around.
Yeah.
I'll read. The book is divided into 3 sections, and there's an opening poem that sort of preludes the 3 sections. I'll skip that one for now and read the first poem of the first section. The New World. Let's go back to when we were still undiscovered, to when losing meant losing and we lost everything. Our names, the candle of our bodies, small tokens of light clipping in and out of us like bullet holes. Our skin a thing for fire. Let's rub the moon between thumb and forefinger until we disappear. There are galaxies of hurt, and in each of them we become masters. We crawl up the throat of the sky like dying animals and beg heaven to let us in. We don't believe in anything worth saving. The fields flashing in the quiet distance, the stars raked from the chest of the night like glowing leaves. In a way, we are as still as the day we were born. A pair of yellow eyes floating in a tree. The idea of flight so close, we stretch back an arrow until we are the arrow.
Cool. It made, when you were reading that, I was thinking, wow, this is really different for a philosophy major. But then at the same time, not, because there's echoes of that in there. But it's just those imaginative leaps with the language. That must have been a heck of a release or journey for you when you started doing it. And you started doing this in college, basically. Writing,
yeah, I did. I would say from my, foggy memory, my junior year, so I would have been 20, 21 years old, is when I first took creative writing classes. I took an intro to poetry, and then I took a travel writing and a food writing class. For a while, I thought I wanted to get into food writing, and it makes sense now with my restaurant background. And I remember my mom telling me she's a fabulous cook. I would be like 10 or 11 years old, and she'd make a dish that I had had many times, and I'd say, "Hey, Mom, there's something different today. What'd you do differently?" And she would be like, "Gosh darn it, I used a different brand of blah, 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 or whatever, something most people wouldn't
Can't
pick
get
up
it by
on.
you.
And I never even thought about it, but she knew. She was like, you've got a different palette and a different way of sort of absorbing what you're experiencing. And so to me, that's sort of a lens for looking at why I am doing what I am doing now. But yeah, started taking classes, was deciding between trying to send a manuscript for grad school for poetry or creative nonfiction. I was kind of torn, and I had a good friend of mine in Chicago who had read a lot of my work and said, I think these are both good, but I think you're gonna make a better poet. Like, this is my stamp, you should do that. And I trusted him and took his advice, and I haven't really looked back.
Yeah, well, and no reason why you maybe can't explore that other avenue at some
Absolutely.
point.
I actually
look at Harrison, right? I mean,
Yeah, totally.
He did everything.
Yeah. Dombrowski's doing that too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, which I saw him yesterday and up the Rattlesnake, and he was taking his son fishing.
Nice.
But I told him he said he'd get here eventually. We need to get him in this program.
Yeah, definitely.
What else? I had something on my feeble mind a minute ago, and I do this all the time. I never remember what the hell I wanted to ask. So I guess I better do something else.
Yep.
What else? Anything with you? You want to share something else? It might come back to me, or do you have anything you want to say? Or
Maybe I'll just read another one.
yeah,
Something else.
yeah. Do that.
I'll read.
Maybe I'll remember what I was going to ask you.
I'll read what is either the shortest or close to the shortest poem in this book, if I can find it. Once, I took a mason jar of fireflies and shook them like a snow globe. So much death lighting up, Manhattan in my hands.
I just read that. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
It's kind of my favorite poem in the book. It's not necessarily the best poem, and it's weird to say that such a short little snippet can be a favorite, but I have found over the years that brevity and the economy of language to create an image, to create an impact, is something that I value highly. And if someone, the entire language surrounding poetry is that very thing, right?
Right.
It's distilled prose into a format that changes how we interpret the world we live in and how we experience it. So if you can take the actual definition of what poetry is and thereby distill it even more into something so succinct that works, it's such a rewarding experience.
Right.
And for me, that poem, I felt proud of that poem because it achieved something that I was not necessarily intentionally trying to do, but was hoping would happen at some point.
Right.
And
it's sort of, in that short a number of words in that little poem, it kind of embodies what a lot of your poems do, I think, and that is, and I don't know who you. I was going to ask you now. See, it always comes back. I was going to ask you who you read, or who are you when you first started writing and whatnot. Who were the people that struck you, that you read, that you loved to?
Yeah, when I very first started in college, in undergrad, I was introduced to Mary Ruefle, who has become a name on my shelf over and over and over again. And Tony Hoagland, who I've had a varied relationship with reading his work and learning about who he was over time. But as a 20-year-old knucklehead, I remember engaging with one of his poems called Wind Chimes, and I had it folded on a piece of paper that I had printed out, and I would keep it in my back pocket and take it to college parties, and I would drink red wine, and I'd unfold this little piece of paper and read them this poem, and all my friends thought I was a funny idiot, which I was. But it meant so much to me. It was me learning that poetry wasn't just Shakespeare. It wasn't, old school.
You could whip it out at a party.
Yeah, exactly. I was afraid of poetry until I took some more contemporary classes.
Yeah.
And then from there, once I got out to Montana, before there, Chicago, Jack Gilbert became very iconic for me and still is. What's funny and a little bit ironic is I wasn't introduced to Richard Hugo until I was taking a literature class on campus here, my second year, and Nancy Cook taught us Degrees of Gray in Phillipsburg, and that poem destroyed me, like in a way that I unlike any other for me in the poetry sense, and to the point that I have words from that poem tattooed on my arm. But Richard Hugo, once I started discovering and exploring his biography and his work and The Triggering Town, which is basically my poetry Bible,
Right.
I felt like I had just relearned what it meant to read, what it meant to write, what it meant to be in Montana, and to be a resident writer in Montana, and that sort of history kind of just...
The whole sort of serendipity
Yeah.
of showing up here.
Exactly, and
having
not
that-
knowing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
It's
it wasn't. I wasn't going to the University of Montana because I was so, in the know about its
Oh,
history.
Richard Hugo.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't know anything about this place.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna come here, do 2 years, and get out of Dodge.
Right.
And then I was like, no, you're not. This is gonna dig its claws into you, and I'm glad it did.
Yeah, totally. I asked that thinking that, well, I wondered if like James Tate maybe. I mean, because of the imaginative leaps in the lines and the humor. You got a lot of humor in your work, and I thought, well, I wonder if you ever liked reading Richard Brautigan.
Yeah.
Because I say Brautigan because at the same time as the humor that seems to be the playfulness and all that's in your work, there's a definite gravity in a lot of your work. I mean, it's serious business. I mean, it's like images are. It's a frightening situation.
Yeah. I have a sick tendency to lean toward the dark.
Yeah.
That it's an obsession that a lot of artists have, obviously, and one I'm not immune to. And I found that, especially in my 20s and early 30s, that was the driving factor behind what I found important to me in poetry was imagining the things that terrify you the most, and then allowing yourself to channel them. We have so many voices, we have so many identities as one embodied human, but because we're just one body, we often think that our identity is singular. And while on a physical level that's true, even our bodies are changing and our cells redevelop every 7 years. And I think that the voices come and go in waves and in spotlights and in lighthouses. And if you can't tap into them on a regular basis because you would go insane, then at least tap into them on an artistic basis to kind of recognize and nod that you are complex.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I actually watched it was like a Nova program last night on PBS, and it was on the brain.
Was it?
And so they were talking about how we have this sense of ourself as being this thing, but it's actually just this composite conscious thing we have based on 900 million neurons or something firing in all these different ways that we're totally unconscious of, and we have these pressures on us that we don't even know about.
Right.
So we really don't have as much free will as we think we do.
Exactly. Yeah. That's pretty, I'm into that.
Yeah. Well, how about something from the new manuscript?
Sure.
Hymn Gasoline.
Yeah. Right. This one has a little profanity. Apologies.
Uh-oh.
Chicken fever. Winter is killing everyone I know. On the radio today, the DJ mumbled, "Mercy is for pussies," and like God, I started to doubt my existence. In the crawl space of the attic, I hide cube cheese, and by the floorboards lay traps. It's a miracle to believe you're alive at all. Field mice run wild through my mind late at night, and their tails bleed a red so pink you could swallow your tongue just to become a different person. Doesn't that sound nice? Drowning inside yourself, flailing like a kite mid-storm. Let's play truth or dare, but you go first and forever return to that perversion of yourself you put behind bars years ago. Of course, I'm in my mother's underwear again, eating candy. I'm on top of the roof with a megaphone and a hatchet, canceling out the weather. Love is a peacock in outer space. There is nothing more cruel and satisfying than having wings you cannot use. Twice already, I've tried to sleep fully clothed while sober. Call it head lice for the soul. Call it by name. The only game worth playing involves dice and cancer. Here, in the sweet, thick middle of misery, children build tree forts. Fathers watch TV. Angels fall and call it flying.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's illustrative of what I was just kind of
I
saying.
didn't even think about
Yeah,
it, but
yeah.
as I was reading, I was like, oh, this is the conversation we were just having.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think there's echoes of Hugo in there, as a matter of fact.
Well, that's going to be true with or without my permission.
Yeah, totally, yeah. There you go, those neurons that are
Yeah.
you can't get a hold of. They're just telling you what to do. Okay, well, what else? Anything else you want to?
You know, I can just say I've written this manuscript quite a bit of years ago. It's been 5, 6
okay.
years ago, and I've been shopping it around for a while, and it's gotten a close call, probably a dozen times roughly.
Yeah, I can't believe it's not in print. If it's been around that long, it's
Yeah,
a good
it's a hard game, you know.
yeah,
It's been really close, and that's given me the sort of psychological boost to keep
Yeah.
sending it.
Yeah.
But there can be some dejecting moments where you're like, once more.
Yeah.
But I don't take any of the rejections personally. Always that little hope gets deflated, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna throw in the towel.
No.
And for me, if it gets published, if it gets a spine and a cover, fantastic. That'll be some validation to the work I put in. And if it doesn't, I still am very much of the mind that the process is more important than the product.
Yeah.
And when we opened the restaurant back in 2019, 3 months before COVID, probably about a year and a half or so leading up to the restaurant, and then that first year or so of COVID, there was a good 2-3 years where I wasn't writing, or if I was, it was awful and it's just not me, because I was so consumed by the other project that was starting to materialize, and then COVID changed the entire landscape of what that meant for all of us. And part of me wondered, I was like, okay, I got my one book in, I achieved that thing that I so desperately wanted to achieve, and maybe I'm done. Maybe that's a chapter in my life that's closed. And it's true that it might be that case for publishing full-length books, but it's not true for what writing and what poetry mean to my identity, or one of my identities in that sense. So it was really refreshing to start writing again a couple years ago, and to feel like it wasn't total crap.
Yeah.
And to feel like I hadn't lost the muse, or the muse hadn't given up on me, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, you think about the number of people out there writing, and they're good writers, and they're submitting their stuff too.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a whole lot of the networking
Sure.
angle to everything,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if somebody's got a foot in the door, if they've got that much more of a toe in the door than you do,
Right.
and they also have a great manuscript,
It's
that's the way it
true.
works,
And
right?
that's been a struggle of mine, that over time I've come to terms with, where I remember being in grad school and thinking about, going to AWP and different writing conferences and thinking about the sort of social networking, quasi-nepotistic component to it all. And it bothered me. It didn't sit well.
Right.
And it didn't feel like something I wanted to participate in.
Right.
And then you get a little bit older and you realize it doesn't have to be nepotistic. It can be organic and a relationship, a symbiotic kind of entanglement. And that sometimes, like, you have to lean into it, especially if it's a good thing versus hey, I'm trying to weasel my way in,
Right.
If it's something where someone's like, hey, I really like your work and I want to see more from you. If it's good enough, I want to publish a second book. Like, I would not say no to that. And it wouldn't feel like I was doing a disservice to the community or myself.
Right. Yeah. And in the end, I think it's just good to get it out there somehow.
Yeah.
Even if you wind up going to a smaller, insignificant
Sure.
press, or you'd wind up doing it yourself at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, Twain did, and
Yeah.
all kinds of people did.
And if there's an audience, if there's a community, even if it's just our neighborhood who says, hey, I want to read this and I don't want it to be in, loose leaf format.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and it's like so many. I don't remember some Frenchman but I've heard it quoted a million times. And art it's not complete until someone else has experienced it.
Yeah.
It's not really your poem because once you release it,
Yeah.
somebody else makes it theirs. The brain does what they want with the damn thing.
Exactly.
So
it's
that's
their dialogue to have with the page.
So that's why this is important.
Yeah.
You know.
And, speaking toward that, having sent this manuscript out so many times and having it get so close, I had a friend of mine who had her first book published, Kaylin Capper-Thomas, by Deep Vellum Press, which is a newer press, and her book is called Iguana. It's fantastic. And she and I went to grad school together, yada, yada. But the poetry editor for this press also is the poetry editor for a literary journal called The Boiler. And Sebastian Harimo is the guy's name, who is the editor for these two things. And he had published several of my poems years ago in The Boiler. And I had met him at AWP a long time ago. So I reached out to her and said, hey, would it be weird? Should I email him and say, hey, do you remember me? And are you interested in looking at a manuscript potentially? And she said, you should absolutely do that. So I reached out and he responded and said, I'm busy and we're not taking on new work right now, but let's have a conversation. And I sent him the manuscript. We chatted for an hour via Zoom, 2-3 months ago. And he said, here's where I see some potential room for growth. Maybe get back into the manuscript. It's not quite finished yet. Let's mess with section 3, basically. And he called out something that deep down I knew was on point and true, but I had protected my mind from thinking it. And it's like, no, if you really want to publish this thing, you have to be open to the editorial process and the fact that it might not be finished. And so he said, take the summer and then send me something in August and we'll see what happens. So, that toe in the door that you were talking about, it could be there, it could not be, but pursuing this avenue felt like, hey, if he's a fan and has published your work before, like, why not say, hey, what's up?
Yeah.
And he's been very gracious and also very, like, here's my timeline, here's what's possible, here's what's not. Like, don't get your hopes too high, but also you never know. And that's an okay purgatory to be in.
And it's always good to listen.
Yeah.
When anybody has anything to say, sometimes it might be total bullshit, but other times it's as soon as they say it, like you said,
Right.
yeah.
It's almost like as the words are
I
coming
knew.
out of their mouth, you're just like, oh,
That's the spot.
That's it. That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's still a little bit of hope for it. But I'm also working on another series of poems, which I was explaining before this, which if you'd like, I can
Yeah,
read a few from that.
Oh, totally,
Do you want me to preface it first? Or?
Sure, yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
My personal information, but my wife and I have been trying to have a baby for about a year and a half, and to no avail. Did all the lab work and everything checked out. It's just the timing hasn't happened, and we're getting a little bit older, so we'll see if that works or not. But I was mowing my lawn last summer and listening to a poetry podcast with Rachel Zucker, and it's called Commonplace. And she interviews different poets, on a weekly basis. And the one I was listening to was Matthew Lippman, and she was talking about how his poems are very much more internalized and domesticated than a lot of what you see out in the world today. He talks about, Little League with his 7-year-old and how much that comes up in his work. And I thought that was just great because it's not, there's no glory to it. It's not fantastical. It's simple, it's mundane, it's quotidian. And I, with the idea of having a child looming, I pictured my life as being very much that.
Right.
And it's like, all right. So I started, mowing the lawn and started writing some lines in my head, and I had to turn off the mower, and I ran inside and thought, okay, I'm gonna write letters to an unborn child, and if nothing else, it's a creative exercise, but it could also become, a chess box of, relics that I give to an 18-year-old on their way to college someday.
Right.
Who knows?
Right. Or a book.
Or a book, exactly. It's possible, but it started with just as this kernel of an idea, and then I found momentum and just really enjoyed the experience of this way of writing.
Yeah.
It gave me a through line, it gave me an angle. It involved both real and imagined emotions, and I don't know, it just felt like the right time to jump into something different with my style of writing.
Yeah.
So I'll read a couple of these,
Yeah.
just because you start to see more momentum as they go. Letter to the Unborn. You do not yet live, and it is possible you never will. Still I mow the lawn with your name under tongue, the letters pulsing together like a maraca of bees. I rub the magic 8-ball of my gut and pretend I am a mother. But the clouds read, better luck next time. I palm the handle of my hatchet and imagine us deep in the woods by a body of water so green you could dream up anything. Shaving kindling off the years, making memories we're bound to forget. I rest the god of my hand on your neck, silently show you how to blow a small galaxy of wind between your fingertips, how to turn thin air into energy. Our best conversations happen on days like this. Summer sun, a mirage of itself, gasoline on my wrists, wondering if you'll exist. Letter to Together Alone. You're nearly 3 in my mind, and I have you on my shoulders like a Greek myth on a trail by a creek in the mountains. I haven't hiked in years, and you want to cry, but even your acorn mind understands the job at hand. Your mother's in England again, and I feel responsibility like a mattress on my face. Maybe tonight I will share with you the secret of slicing open a hot dog, lining it with cheese, all the small pleasures of melt and char and mustard dripping on our knees. I'll spin a little early Merle, dance with you on my feet. Together we will make a call transcontinental, brush our teeth clockwise, and I'll dream it was all real with a miniature hand to squeeze. Letter to Infant Baptism. You took a shit on the floor and made a mural on the wall with your forearms. Some days I wish you were never born. No moral code outside your own cornucopia brain. I want to pick up a hot tub and dump it on the animal of your face. I want to baptize you in the name of fatherly rage. You laugh soft and insane, and those twin dimples beam like stars from either side of your gaze. You rip through me like a gun. You open my chest and inscribe your place. I pick you up, and for the next half hour, am dead forever. I'll read maybe just one or two more.
Mm-hmm.
Letter to you from Freud and Pavlov. You're in love with your mother. That makes two of us. Together we watch the violin of her body shave kernels of gold off a cob, lather them in butter, salt and pepper the whole fortune until a slow music floods our eyes. We're like dogs, sad and pining, our silence the only language we've ever believed in. I want you to know she is younger than you will ever be. How her hair nests tropical birds, how the metronome of her breathing with you on her chest predates time. You will learn some things about her no one else will ever know. You will forgive yourself the thoughts of inflicting danger. You will tear us apart and glue us together, and I will never hesitate to look down the hallway of your mind and fill it with a promise thrown on the floor like a bag of ice. I'll read just one more small one. Letter to Time Unknown. I walk around town looking for interesting stones, river shrapnel, anything semi-natural I can convince you someday is supernatural. I want to take an arrowhead and carve the small watermelon of you out of your mother's belly. We're going to kill each other in the kitchen, the hospital, and it will be your fault. Know this now, I consider you a threat, but it takes two to tango, kiddo, and a dozen plus years from now, when I receive a call from Officer Horsebreath about the egged house or knifed truck tires, I will swear on her life that you were by my side, at home, building a UFO from little relics found in a shoebox in the garage from time unknown.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's a wonderfully different sort of approach, but it's still just, it's obviously a Philip Schaefer poem, right? I mean, it's so playful. They're all playful.
And I think that's something that I'm learning about myself via time on this earth and time spent with poetry. The super dark and serious stuff that is in my first and second manuscript, that tone is still there and present, but in a much more acute way. And I really want to balance it out with, some of the more lighthearted things, some of the funnier things, There's not enough funny poetry out there. There is some, for
Tony
sure.
Hoagland,
yeah. But, there's something to it where if you can achieve a level of humor without it being doused in irony, then, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't always succeed, but when you get the moments, you're like, I get a chuckle out of that. Cool, that's good.
Yeah, totally. I was going to ask you, too, just when because like I said, I told you before we started this, I was just compressed.
Yeah.
I was in a short time frame. I was trying to read all the stuff that you sent me. And I wondered if, because just for people that are listening to this or other poets or whatnot, in terms of your, all kinds of things probably generate poems or get you started. Sometimes, there's definitely a lot of sound in your poems, and then sometimes you'll have a form thing. Sometimes you'll have a topic maybe. Do you start anywhere in particular usually, or not?
It varies,
Yeah.
and it's changed a little bit over time, but generally speaking, I've started with an image that strikes me, and usually it's my mind's ability to, or not ability, but desire to manipulate a standard image into something more complicated that transforms the way we look at it, often through metaphor or simile. And if I find something that I can just kind of chew on for a few hours or a few days, and I realize it's not going away, it's like, okay, it's time to put it down. And so I'll start with that. And sometimes that line or image or phrase becomes the first line. Sometimes it turns into the last line. Sometimes it's just a trampoline for what will become a different poem, and I scrap it all together or move it into something else. But for me, it's rarely topical or idea-based. I don't have a vision yet.
Right.
I let the poem do its own thing.
Right.
That being said, with the poems I just read, it's sort of counterintuitive to that. It's still true where I'm writing more of these, and sometimes it's just a weird image, and then I start typing, writing, whatever, and by the end of it, I realized I'm writing another letter,
Right.
and I didn't know it.
Right. Right.
Which, that's the beauty of the writing process.
That's where your brain is
Yeah,
at right
it's like
now.
knowing that you're gonna tap into a closed door you're not expecting, it's like, that's the fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you get at it from all kinds of different ways.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, there's actually, if I know we're wrapping up.
Yeah, no, we have a
there's,
little time.
There's one more poem from here, and I don't read it all the time, but it's the poem that's the most indicative of that process. I remember when I first moved here, I lived in a little basement apartment in the Lower Rattlesnake, so I could either walk or bike to campus pretty quickly and easily. And I was walking to campus, and it was like a crisp fall morning, and the clouds were doing their beautiful cumulonimbus thing, and it was just one of those magical Missoula mornings. And so I was watching, I saw a thing, the images started to accumulate and snowball, and I had this poem almost line by line written in my head the whole day, and then I came home and just put it down, and it was like, it just was what it was. And then I don't know, it's just like indicative of like how my writing process can sometimes be done in a few minutes time, which is rare for most writers. And for me, it's not always the case, but when it happens, it's like, oh, like that thing just solidified itself without my permission, and we just got to put it on paper.
Along for the ride.
Along for the ride, exactly.
Excuse me.
Okay, here we go. Practicing invisible. I keep staring at this bent elbow of ducks in the sky, wondering which of us will break first. Eventually, everything returns to glass. My breath against a window, the ocean. I cock back my finger to drop them one by one into the town pond. I draw a trophy for myself with the clouds. If I could bring back the dead, I would only be able to bury them again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was just a fun one to write. I saw the flying V of ducks and then kind of did that little imaginative stretch, and the rest kind of just filled in the holes,
Right, yeah. And, I mean, there's the interesting aspect of how much of us there is in a poem and how much the poem takes off and leaves us behind. But, you're there. I mean, I see you in the poems, but a lot of times you're hard to find. You're disguising yourself a lot.
Yeah.
And then some of them are not that way at all.
Right,
I mean,
no.
they're totally
And the middle section, the middle section was written as a chapbook manuscript, and it got published originally as a chapbook. But it was a series I wrote when my wife went back to the Midwest for a long weekend, 8 years ago, a long time ago.
Right.
And I remember just wallowing in the melodrama of what if she had left forever. Yeah. And so I wrote all of these little poems where it's like, in this one you haven't left, in this one, yada yada. And I kind of lean into it in this like magnetic field, 69 love songs kind of way. And to be honest, those poems and that structure is kind of how I started writing the kiddo poems. Whereas like it gave me a through line, it gave me an energy to kind of building block off of.
Right, what if?
What if, yeah. The big what if. Yeah. And while I like to write the what ifs on a, universal, darker level from time to time, right now I'm more interested in the what if on a personal, myopic level.
Yeah. totally. Well, yeah, I'm not sure how much time we're getting there. We're getting close to the end. Is there anything else that you might want to say or pontificate on briefly before we get the hell out of here? Or?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's been great, man.
No, I'm excited to just be hanging out with poems and people who like poems.
Yeah. It's been a treat. And so if you have never picked up a copy of Bad Summon by Philip Schaefer, it's available in your local bookstores for sure. And we'll look forward to him, Gasoline, appearing one of these days.
Hopefully, we'll see. Right on.
And good luck on the domestic front.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with all of it. The what if.
The what if. All right, join us next time for another Poet in Montana. Thanks.
Got a lifetime filled